Lawmakers, witnesses, and experts are weighing in on the actions taken before, during, and after the deadly Capitol riots.
Members of Congress investigating the insurrection are voicing their opinions on what happened that day.
You will hear that President Trump was yelling and, quote, really angry at advisors who told him he needed to be doing something more. And aware of the rioters' chance to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment, quote, maybe our supporters have the right idea.
January 6th and the lies that led to insurrection have put 2.5 centuries of constitutional democracy at risk.
Last night's session was just the first hearing the committee has held, with more that we expect to have over the summer. White House correspondent for TheHill.com, Alex Gangitano, is joining us now to break down what we know so far. Alex, thanks for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me this morning.
How important, before we break down everything that sticks out to you from last night, how important was this hearing last night? Some people are comparing this to 50 years ago, the Watergate scandal.
Yeah, well, this hearing was obviously in prime time, and this was really an effort by this committee to remind Americans, outside of the D.C. Beltway, who have been not focused on this, have been moved on for the last year and a half, of what happened that day, and to also give all this new information that we heard, that the case against President Trump and his allies. And I think the fact that it was, on late at night, people could tune in when they wanted to after dinner, or just be able to pop in and out or hear clips from it in the morning news this morning, like now, was really just targeting the American people and trying to, I think, make the case that something like this was so unprecedented and beyond, the norms of conducting yourself after an election, that something, this is something that can't be forgotten. I think that was largely the role of what the committee was trying to do here.
And Alex, at one point there was a 12 minutes of video, some of it never before seen. It really painted the picture of how violent that day was. It was different angles, different body camera videos. And we also heard from Capitol Police Officer Caroline Edwards. We want to give you a listen at what she had to say.
I think we have it here.
I can just remember my breath catching in my throat, because what I saw was just a war scene.
She painted this picture of this violent combat. Alex, how important do you think moving forward, testimony like that is, moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hearings from police officers on the ground, I think, is so powerful. This woman obviously is talking about the fact that this felt like a war zone. She was even saying that she would look around at the police officers, her fellow colleagues, and they were bleeding. There was blood all over their faces. She was slipping in people's bloods, really trying to paint the picture here that this wasn't, a peaceful protest. This was something beyond that, to the point that it became dangerous. She also, I think, was one of the most powerful moments of her testimony was she mentioned the late Officer Brian Sitnick, who ended up passing away the day after the riots from multiple strokes. And she said, she actually saw him that day and looked over, and his face was paper white. And that really, shows that this killed him that day. And I think her just having that firsthand account was really powerful. And we've heard from other police officers who are on the ground too. A lot of Capitol police officers have been outspoken about that day. So I think that that's another tactic that the committee is using here, is to keep drilling down. We're not just talking to Democrats, we're not just talking to Republicans, but we're actually talking to police officers who were in charge of trying to contain the scene that day.
Excuse me, Alex, most people before last night made up their opinion about what happened last year, right? And so do you think, if the main point of this committee is to point the finger at Trump, do you think last night that they did a good job? Do you think they're going to be able to sway the public opinion?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of people have made up their mind, and I think a lot of people have moved on, as I was saying earlier, which rightly so. And I think that the case here was that not only was this riot destructive and dangerous, but it also they were trying to paint that former President Trump directly led to the violence, and his words directly led to the violence that day. So I think there could be some independent voters, perhaps, who were considering voting again for President Trump if he were to run again for president, that could watch something like this and perhaps change their mind. We'll see how polling comes out about it, if people actually tuned in and maybe were swayed one way or the other. But I do think to try to paint this picture that he masterminded this grand plan, as we saw Liz Cheney talking about, that he, turned on Mike Pence pretty harshly that day and was ready to, support the protesters over Mike Pence. Things like that, I think, could perhaps change the mind of an independent voter. And we also are only a few months away from the midterm. So, of course, the timing of this all with the committee putting this all out now in mid-June, I think all kind of looks ahead towards the midterm elections.
And Alex, you mentioned Republican Liz Cheney. She had some harsh words, a lot of them. One phrase she said in part was, Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Moving forward in these next hearings, what do you expect to see coming up that can prove that, and what possible criminal action might follow?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Liz Cheney also said that the next hearings will kind of describe this sophisticated plan that President Trump had to remain in power and to reject the results of the 2020 election, and that she'll be able, and her committee will outline what this plan was, talk to more White House aides, talk to more people on the ground to see that this wasn't just a one-off day and a one-off comment from the president, but this was an outlined plan. We'll see if they're able to do that. And I think looking ahead of what this could mean for the president, for the former president, one of the most, I think, compelling things actually that came out of last night were these investigators aired video testimony from members of the group, the Proud Boys, saying that when Trump mentioned in a debate against Biden ahead of the 2020 election, that this white nationalist group should stand back and stand by, that actually caused a spike in the group's recruitment. And that membership was able to triple in the wake of that remark. I think that that was something that, the president, they could try to outline that the president had planned this even back then by saying something that could motivate people and mobilize this certain group of people. And if that leads to criminal charges that is associated with that, I don't know. But I think things like that to kind of outline that this was, for months, the president had said things that then caused this scene that day.
Alex, do you think we'll have anyone coming to the president's defense other than his daughter, Ivanka?
That's a great question. He still has some loyal allies, someone like Stephen Miller, who covered his immigration for a long time, Kayleigh McEnerney, who was his White House press secretary at the end. People like that are still very loyal to the former president, and I think they will come to his defense. I think Ivanka Trump is attempted to kind of keep, of course, loyal to her father, but also level-headed about the day, and it didn't bode very well for the president, I think, her testimony last night. But I think we will have some more people who are not his family members necessarily, but were working for him at the time, who I think would come to his defense even more, or ignore this whole thing and not try to get involved or have to give testimony.
And Alex, we have been hearing that some of the House GOP leaders plan to release their own report on what happened on January 6th. Any insight to what that might reveal or look like?
That's a great question. Yeah, the House Republicans are obviously, there's only two of them on this committee. And so leadership is not supportive of this committee and are trying to launch their own investigation, so to say, of what actually went on. And I think a lot of that could try to paint the picture that things did get out of control. You know, Kevin McCarthy, the top Republican in the House, has condemned the day to an extent and said, you know, things, it was a bad day for democracy, but also doesn't outright call it an insurrection, which is something that Democrats have used time and time again to paint this as a harsher day than perhaps Republicans are. So I think the Republicans might try to come out with saying that this was, you know, things were destructive, lives were lost. It was a sad day, but this wasn't a full-on campaign to overthrow the election. This wasn't a mastermind scheme from former President Trump. And I think they'll try to do that, and it all will come down to their defense of the former president.
Well, we will be watching on Monday, and of course, we've got all the latest on QCnews.com if you missed the hearings and the meeting last night. Alex Gangitano, again, White House correspondent with The Hill. Thanks for your breakdown of last night. We look forward to keeping up with you. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.